Hello and welcome to a new Lakers Theory podcast. I am Shane Jackson. Joined with me, as always, is Austin Case. We are going live right after a 127-124 Lakers loss to the Washington Wizards in overtime because the Lakers love playing in overtime games. Austin is resorted to just drinking his sorrows away. He is very sad. We were watching this actually through StreamYard in preparation for this podcast, getting very hype. And I have videos. I sent out one video on Twitter about it over at Lakers Theory. And I thought it was going to be actually kind of a happy podcast. And at the end of this overtime, Austin was cussing the Lakers out and saying they suck. So I want to go straight to Austin. Let's get your raw emotions from this 3-point loss to the Wizards. What the hell happened?
That's a good question, honestly, because I have no idea. This should not have happened. Like, they were leading this game, everything was going smooth, and then just something within the game happened, and they just couldn't finish it. And I don't know, man. Like, it's so frustrating that, like, I was so frustrated. I just don't know. Like, I have no freaking idea what the heck is going on. Like, this should have been they should not have had an issue beating this team. Yes, Bradley Beal, and as much as I hate Westbrook, like Westbrook too, like they are both very good players. But still, like they should not have lost this game. So that's how I feel right now. Like this they let this game go.
Wizards have now won 5 in a row, while the Lakers have lost 3 in a row. And we'll get into the 3-game skid as a whole because we have not recorded since really the 3-game skid started. The last podcast was during that Timberwolves game. So basically, we've missed the last 3 games. So I wanted us to take a broad view of the last 3 games in this life without AD and Dennis Schroeder. And all that. But I figured we'd start off with this Wizards game since it's very fresh in our mind. Another overtime game, first of all. These minutes on LeBron are just killer. Like, he's 43 minutes right now. I saw a stat being tweeted out, like, right in the fourth quarter of this game, that ever since AD's injury, he leads the league in minutes per game. And he was 50th in minutes per game before the AD injury. And then he went from 10th to 3rd in touches per game. His usage rate going into this game jumped up 3 percentage points since the AD injury. So very taxing stretch here on LeBron James. And I think not just LeBron, you see that as a whole with this team. I don't think it's, and everyone is probably tired in the NBA, but I don't think it's ever been more obvious of a team needing an all-star break than the Lakers right now. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of looming, obviously, in the near future. But you could just see, I think, especially in that overtime, just the tired legs with those shots, the shot selection by players. I think you just saw an exhausted team. And I think you saw that really as a whole during this 3-game skid, but especially it was evident in that overtime game. I think they kind of claw their way in to forcing it to overtime late in regulation. And then that was kind of exerted all their energy, to say the least. And it did not end very well. Is that fair to say, you think? I don't want to use tired legs as an excuse because I feel that's kind of lame, but I think it was obvious tonight, especially for a team like the Lakers who have been in, 4 overtime games, as you said before we got on the air.
Yeah. No, that's fair, especially like they're without Schroeder, and that was kind of like a surprise scratch. I think the Nets, the game against the Nets was the first one that he was out, but
yeah, he's out for contract tracing.
Yeah. And so that's really something that they did not plan for. And this was the 3rd game, but I did see something the other day, like they just had their 9th practice of the entire season. So it's kind of, they have to be tired. Like they're 4 out of the last 9 games have been overtime games. Yeah. They're having to, crawl back into these games to even have a shot to win. And it's just not working out. So, yeah, I mean, they have to be tired. Like,
Yeah.
LeBron played 43 minutes tonight. Like that last shot from the Staples Center logo, like that had to be a tough shot just from the pure fact of how deep it was.
Yeah, and no one's going to feel bad for the Lakers and defending champs, obviously. But, I mean, this is part of this world that the Lakers have to live in right now, playing without AD and Dennis Schroeder, who are two of their top three, shot creators. They're playmakers with the ball. And I think, the Lakers are already sort of tightening their rotation a little bit before all this happened. And then now you look at it, it is crazy tight because there's really nothing else you could do. I mean, I would like to see Cook get a couple minutes here and there, but I mean, they are playing guys. I mean, KCP even at 40 minutes. You have Kuzma, who's around the 40-minute mark as well. And Alex Caruso over 30 minutes off the bench. We were clamoring there in the fourth quarter and overtime for Trez to come back in, who played really well. But even he went over 20 minutes, and Morris went over 20 minutes. I mean, it was just obviously this is what happens when you're without two of your top 3 or 4 players on your team. And I know every team is dealing with some sort of COVID issue and all that stuff, injuries and all that stuff happens. And the Lakers were supposed to be built to overcome and withstand stuff like this. But at some point, it becomes too much, especially when you factor in the amount of overtime games that the Lakers have played in recently. And then, just the stretch as a whole. So I think all of it plays a part into what we saw moments ago. In particular, that you wanted to touch on real quick before we went broad picture.
Yeah, I don't understand why Harrell wasn't in the game there. I mean, if it's matchup based, then okay. But I mean, he's a smaller big, and so if the Wizards were small there, then that would be a good game for him to be in. Just because I felt like he played very well against the Wizards bigs, and like he's given up a lot of size against these guys. And so I really disagree with him not being in the game. He was such a difference maker on the offensive end. And I think they could have used that kind of there even at the end of regulation, and probably there in overtime too. So I mean, whatever the reason was for him not being in there, I think I feel like he should have been.
Yeah, I would be interested. Obviously, the post-game press conference is going on as we record this podcast, so we won't know until tomorrow, and we read all the recaps from this game and stuff like that. But part of me wonders how much it was influenced by the Wizards, because they put really at the 5, and they went small a lot late. And I don't know, maybe they thought matchup-based. Maybe they wanted to go with Marc Gasol more in that scenario. I don't know. That seems to be the most logical scenario for me, because he had 5 fouls, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So he was in foul trouble, but that doesn't remove him completely from the game. I mean, we didn't see him at all down the stretch. So I think, and this kind of gets into what this life is without AD and Schroeder, but I mean, he's probably their second best offensive player, right? Like in terms of just ability to create baskets for himself. I don't know. I mean, KCP needs some setup there. Even Caruso and Kuzma aren't players like that. I think, Trez is probably number 2 in terms of offensive firepower that the Lakers have with this current group on the roster. And obviously, Schroeder, by the way, should only miss one more game, reportedly. I believe so. So he would be back Friday against the Blazers. So that obviously helps. But I think that is kind of made this recent stretch more alarming. And so that's where I wanted to get into now. I actually thought we would spend most of the podcast just talking about the 2 losses, and then the Wizards game didn't matter. But it ended up tying in pretty well. But the Lakers have now lost 3 in a row. And again, that's without Schroeder and AD. And I wanted to ask what your biggest takeaway from this stretch is. I mean, what is there one thing that caught your eye in all 3 of these losses that you want to bring up and you think is worthy of mentioning moving forward?
I think it's fair to note that LeBron James is 36 years old, and he probably doesn't have the gas in him to just dominate and be the only the only guy on that team that can really carry, kind of how we saw when he was younger. So for me, that's kind of something that stands out to me. Like LeBron probably isn't as capable to just will the team to these wins that even the last two games, like, he just, it's not there still. Like he can still dictate and dominate any game he plays, but just maybe not as well as he could. But I don't know that without Schroeder and AD, like they're a completely different team, and you're just gonna hope that there's not very many situations where you're without two of your top three, maybe even top four guys, and it just kind of shows that when you're down two key players, it's going to be hard to win games.
The LeBron take is interesting, actually, because I definitely did not that's not the opinion I came across. Again, I'm a LeBron fan, so maybe I'm a little biased in that regard, but I felt like it's the opposite. I don't think the Lakers have done well, even pre-AD injury, in the non-LeBron minutes. And I feel like, there's been a lot of, LeBron carrying certain lineups regardless throughout the season, whether AD was in there or not. And so that's why that wouldn't have been my takeaway from this stretch. I think there's obviously an argument to be made that, he can't be the only guy on the team, but that's why they got AD. No, and I don't think honestly, if KD, I'm trying to think of another player. Like KD can't be by himself. Like it's you want another player anyways to win a title. But that's definitely not the takeaway I had, because I think the more concerning thing is how the Lakers can survive in the non-LeBron minutes, which has been a problem basically since LeBron's been a Laker. I don't think they've done very well in these non-LeBron minutes, but they were piecing it together in the last postseason. They weren't terrible anyways. But I don't think this year has been they've improved in that regard, even with AD lineups. Like that's the crazy part to me. So that wouldn't have been my takeaway. My takeaway actually is I'm big on every game teaches us something, and we can learn something about a team, because over the course of an 82 game season, like all these games matter, and you learn something along the way and all that stuff. It's part of the sports writer in me. It's just how I'm wired. I think in the grand scheme of things, at some point in June, July, or whatever, when we look back into the season, this 3-game stretch is not going to matter. Like we will not care what happened during these 3 losses. I didn't expect all 3 of them to be losses, but I would tie in the Jazz game as well with that. This 4-game stretch, I don't think it's going to matter in the long run. Like we can say, yes, I'd like to see the Lakers do this. We'd like to see some sort of lineups like that. But at the end of the day, like the best version of the Lakers is going to involve LeBron, AD, or even Dennis Schroeder. Like those are the top 3 guys. And when you don't have 2 of them, like it's just, it seems insane to me to expect anything important during the stretch, any lesson during the stretch whatsoever. I've only been really interested to see like what can LeBron do, and then other guys like just getting more of a role. Like that's been the interesting part to me. And yes, I obviously want the Lakers to win it. Like late in this Wizards game, like we were celebrating, we were getting hyped late in the stretch. I wanted the Lakers to win, but I didn't give a shit if they lost. Like that's, I think that's the difference from this stretch compared to any other stretch. Like I can't imagine caring what the Lakers do in this world where they don't have Anthony Davis and they don't have Dennis Schroeder. Now, at some point, Dennis Schroeder's going to be back in the mix, and that changes things up a little bit. Obviously, it's still not, hey, this is what the best version of the Lakers looks like, obviously, but like that's still something to be said. Like I can't imagine, like this is reminiscent of, first Lakers group with LeBron, right? When it was just LeBron and all those young guys. Like it just, I don't know. It doesn't. I enjoy seeing other players make plays late in the game, like Alex Caruso. He was balling again. KCP was balling tonight, but I don't care. I don't care about this stretch. I don't think it's going to be important in the long run, and maybe that's naive.
No, I think it's fair. Like, I hate to see them lose, especially games like this and against the Heat. Like, I feel like the games that they should win, and I expect them to win, and then they just kind of like screw up and honestly blow it. Like, I feel like they blew this Wizards game.
Yeah.
Like, those just really piss me off, and so. But no, that's a fair take. Like, you know, when it's playoff time and we're hanging out, freaking drinking beer and stuff together, like, we're not gonna think about the time where they lost 3 games in a row, and so yeah, like, in the grand scheme of things, this 3-game stretch doesn't matter. It like you kind of mentioned it does give the role players a chance to get more minutes and stuff like that and play together. So that could be beneficial in the grand scheme of things. But just kind of as of right now, when we're expecting to be in the playoffs, then yeah, like, whatever.
Yeah, and I've just heard like people talk about like, hey, maybe the Lakers could try to do this to enhance their offensive output a little bit more. And it's just like it doesn't matter, because in the meaningful games in June and July, their offensive output is 80 or LeBron James, like, and even Dennis Schroeder. So yeah, I don't know. I've been watching this game from a actually kind of casual standpoint now. Like, it's just the stress is off, it seems like, during this stretch because I've went into that thinking this. Let's talk about what else is left over from this brief run here by the Lakers. I should say skid by the Lakers. Celtics, or not Celtics, Heat and Nets. Whew, it is after midnight here in Kansas, so I'm going to mess up all these names. But Heat and Nets losses. Anything in particular that we didn't hit on that stood out? It doesn't have to be specific, or it could be specific. I mean, what do you want to touch on next?
I think I'll just start with the Heat. Like, my biggest takeaway from that was like I didn't like that. I'm pretty sure the last 4 possessions of that game, LeBron didn't take a shot, and I don't agree with that. Yeah, maybe for the organization, the Lakers, they want to have these other guys just have that confidence that they can take that shot, and so. Like, that's probably the thing there. And you kind of mentioned it, like, it doesn't really matter right now. But for me, I was like, no, they need to win this game. And so I was upset that LeBron didn't even attempt to take a shot. Kind of that, I'm pretty sure it was like the last 4 possessions of that game. And so that was kind of my big takeaway, where I didn't really understand why he would kind of pass that ball off like that.
That's fair. I think, part of the thing that stood out to me about what you said, and it kind of tied into what the main thing for me from that Heat game was just the amount of threes that the Lakers took in that game. So 45 threes, we're looking at the box score now if you're watching on YouTube. But Miami Heat won 96-94, and the Lakers took 45 three-pointers. I think I believe I checked the stats shortly after that game, but the Lakers, I believe, are like 27th or 28th in three-point attempts per game in the NBA. So that's a lot more than they take. Like, I think they are in the low 30s in attempts per game. They took a lot more shots. And I don't know how much of that was just settling in terms of maybe the legs again, as we mentioned earlier. Maybe that is a legitimate excuse. Also, just maybe there's not a lot of creativity in terms of shot creation when you don't have – a couple of those guys like AD and Schroeder. So there's probably a lot of reasons for it. Also, just the way the Heat defended the Lakers. Every time LeBron would drive to the basket, they would provide help defense, obviously, because Spoelstra knows LeBron better than most, and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And you saw a lot of LeBron kickouts and guys taking threes. So I think all of it contributed to the Lakers taking a high number of threes. I forgot to look at what they took against the Wizards tonight, but I think that was a big thing that I took away from that Heat game in general, and that kind of leads me into just what I've noticed in the last couple of games is just, I think when we first discussed the AD injury, we were most concerned with the defensive, just the potential drop off on the defensive end of the floor. I think it has actually been the opposite. Like, I don't think the Lakers have been good offensively. Part of that is, again, as I've mentioned a bunch of times already on this podcast, is just not having a guy who can create like AD or even Dennis Schroeder. But I just don't know what the reasoning is. I don't know if they need to be more creative in terms of what they're going to do offensively sets, and that's not exactly what the Lakers have ever really done in the last couple of years. So I don't know. I've actually been slightly impressed with their defense without AD, given the circumstances. I just think the offense has been left a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of pointed that out because, the defense has been, it's been pretty decent. An overtime game, so those numbers are going to be skewed a little bit, but, they still held the Nets. I think they held them under 110.
109. I'm pulling the box
score up. And so that was, that was a big deal that kind of I saw on Twitter. The Heat, they held them to 96, and then tonight was an overtime game, so the numbers are skewed a little bit there, but yeah, I thought the defense would take the biggest hit, and so but also we weren't expecting Schroeder to not be there.
That's true, yeah.
And so I really think you see that, and there's not really anyone there to create for other people outside of LeBron. And I think that's really where Schroeder is missed, because he can create for himself a lot, and kind of that's we're missing that a little bit here. Obviously AD, you're gonna miss that, and it's super obvious, but we're not, Schroeder can create for himself, and he can kind of draw a guy. He can draw a help defender down if he beats his guy. And so I think we're really seeing that, and it causes them to kind of go a little stale on offense, and they kind of stand around. I remember just at the end of the Wizards game, I kind of said that LeBron got double teamed there. And I was like, nobody cut. They were all standing outside the 3 line. And there was a huge gap in the lane. If someone, catches their guy not looking or something, it's an easy bucket. So I think you miss that without Schroeder, especially. And so, obviously this is late in the game. They're probably, dead tired. So I could understand there not being a lot of cutting, but it's missed. They're stale a little bit without without Schroeder and AD.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Late in the game there in the Wizards, some of this could be resolved by just maybe a little more off-ball movement. You don't, even if you don't have a guy who can maybe beat someone off the dribble, cutting and slicing and stuff like that. That's how you can still create efficient looks as well. And so maybe more of that. Nobody does it better than Caruso, but maybe more of that would help as well. I pulled up the box score. Yeah, the 109-98 Nets loss to the Lakers. That's what started this 3-game skid. Again, look at those threes. That was only down to 30. So yeah, the Heat game was especially high compared to what the Lakers have averaged. I really just an unfortunate time to not have Dennis Schroeder. That amplifies all of this a lot more. I think this would be the ideal time to really see what Schroeder can do. And we'll still get that chance when he comes back. It's not like AD is coming back anytime soon. I don't believe so. So, I think we should be expecting much of the same with the Jazz game coming up in a couple of days, because the Jazz are good. And then maybe the Blazers game could be when the Lakers get back on track. Anything else that we didn't touch on? We're going to get into the buyout market if you're ready to get into that.
No, I can just touch on the Nets game, actually.
Okay.
Something that I noticed and was probably a killer for them is they did not defend the 3 line at
Mm.
all. The Nets shot 46%. Harris is he's a top 5 3-point shooting shooter in the NBA, and he went 6 of 7, and I remember watching, and I think 3 or 4 of those were just wide open shots, and the defender just got lost. And then I know the Cabarro, I think I'm pronouncing that right. But he went 5 of 8, and so it was like I think that was a big deal in that game, and really a difference maker was they didn't defend the 3 line against these guys.
Yeah, I mean the Nets have the offensive firepower. I think having and I know they didn't defend the 3-point line, but like just having an interior presence like AD could change the way the defense looks entirely. I think maybe you're more aggressive attacking the perimeter if you have someone like a rim protector behind you like AD. So maybe that was part of it. I'm surprised how prepared you were to talk about the Nets because I've already forgot about what happened exactly in the Nets game. So credit to you for your notes and taking credit and having something to say about the Nets game because that was a very good point. That is something maybe we could look into in the next couple of games as well because obviously the Blazers are going to shoot pretty well against the Lakers. So is that it now? Now you want to get into the guys? Okay, so you want to get into this. This is your territory. I don't actually pay attention to this whatsoever. So Austin, I'll just hand the baton to you. You take it over. Tell me what's going on in this buyout market. Is there going to be a new person added to the Lakers?
So obviously this is just all talk. Like we have, we don't actually know who's going to be available, but like Boogie Cousins is obviously being linked to the Lakers.
Yeah.
There's Blake Griffin. There's even it's either I think it's Andre Drummond. And so I think we're really looking at the bigs are being brought up because we're without AD now, and just kind of I think just Laker Nation in general wants a more athletic big because we were so used to having JaVale and Dwight Howard last year. So kind of I was thinking that like I don't know. I don't really understand the buyout market too much, but from my interpretation is I think Quinn Cook would have to be let go. And I know they have until February 24th to guarantee his contract. Or on February 24th, they have to guarantee his contract. So they have, and that's where a buyout guy is going to come into play. So that's just something to look out for. I like the idea of Cousins coming back and actually getting to play because I don't think he ever actually got an opportunity to really showcase his talent. Like we know he's very talented, so I would actually love to see him get out on the court in a Lakers uniform and kind of just showcase that. So that's who I would hope they could land in this buyout market. I was on board for Blake Griffin just because he torched the Lakers and I thought he was good. And I was looking through all the comments and stuff about him, and it became very clear that he is kind of washed up a little bit. He can still get the job done, but it's nothing close to what he did against the Lakers. So that's kind of it. I don't know if there's much want for like another wing guy because I feel like we're playing a bunch of kind of wing defenders and stuff like that, and it just kind of seems like the need is for another big. So we'll see. I don't think there's any trades that they could do for a big, just because it's it's going to be really hard to do any trades with the Lakers, just because they're kind of they have these middle guys, but you're not going to want to get rid of them because they're core pieces. And then the rest of your guys they're not going to have that cap space for you to match and stuff. So it's going to be interesting. I think I would like to see them bring back Boogie and him actually get some meaningful time. So, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't. Obviously, that's a whole different world to me. I don't understand any of that, but I just question the idea of bringing someone else in because I feel like it's already we sit here and this is not a good time to talk about it, but most of the time we sit here and go, man, I wish this guy could get more minutes. I wish this guy could get more minutes. And so adding another talented player to the mix, I mean, when you look into what the Lakers want to do, how easy is it going to be to get Boogie Cousins some minutes when you have your full group of big men and AD is, playing more minutes at the 5. I'm referring to the postseason. So it's one of those propositions where you have to weigh short term versus long term. I don't necessarily know the answer to it. The Lakers know better than me in this regard. So I'll obviously defer to whatever they decide, but I just question the idea of how beneficial it would be long term.
Yeah, and I think that's a big argument. Like, whoever they bring in, who's going to give up those minutes for them to play?
Yeah.
And so, and that might be kind of like the big factor that they look at before they even they even think about bringing somebody in. So, but I mean, we just kind of have to wait and see what happens, really. But that's just the whispers, I guess, that are out there.
Well, you're our whispers man. You had to talk about it. We had to get it in a podcast form because you're our go-to guy for that. We have been going on a lot longer than I expected. Do you have any final thoughts? If not, we'll sign out of here. Okay. I don't know when we'll record next. So we could theoretically record Wednesday after the Jazz game, but as I've mentioned a few times, I don't know how pretty that's going to turn out for the Lakers. So maybe it's Friday, maybe it's Sunday night after the Warriors. I think they play the Warriors on Sunday. So maybe it's just Sunday night and we talk about another 3-game stretch. And hopefully it's a 3-game win streak. I don't know. So we'll play it by ear. I would follow us on all social media channels to get a better idea when we want to record, because Austin posted a couple tweets tonight saying, hey, we're going live. And he posted on Facebook as well. And that would be a way to tell people, or to follow when we're going to go live and when we're going to have a show. We're at Lakers Theory everywhere. And you can subscribe to us at all audio platforms as well as on YouTube to watch us do a podcast after midnight, because we clearly look tired. So if you want to see that, just subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. That's going to do it for this edition of Lakers Theory Podcast. Lakers have dropped 3 in a row. Let's hope the losing skid ends real soon. He's Austin Case. I'm Shane Jackson. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time, Lakers fans.